Is there ever a time in a post-apocalyptic world where it would be okay to steal things from other groups? Welcome back to Lost in Games Unscripted, the series where I talk about pretty much whatever comes to mind at any given time. And in this particular video, we're actually responding to a comment from a prior video from Nico Mirrorball 1525. Now, Nico has been following the channel for a while. Shout out. He used to show up on all the live streams and stuff like that. So I really appreciate it. And I see your comments all the time on the videos. This particular comment, I wanted to make a video about it because it's a really interesting topic. So the question that Nico asked was, it's a great video, but I wonder about stealing from the rich or millionaires in this situation when society falls. And if the rich have all those supplies, would it be moral to take it? Or if one guy had all the medicine and water to himself, wouldn't that be immoral to not give anything and keep it all for himself? And then would it be moral to take those supplies and give them to people like Robin Hood? So multifaceted question, a lot to break down there. So let's kind of dig into it and talk about it from a couple different perspectives. Now, first of all, the idea of taking from the rich and giving to the poor, a la Robin Hood, is an interesting one because on the surface, if you think about it from the aspect of, well, if somebody has earned something, is it right to take the things that they have earned and try to give them to other people? And people debate things. You know, there are plenty of political debates, and there are debates about communism and socialism and capitalism and all that kind of stuff, different ways of distributing wealth. But in this instance, we're talking more about a post-apocalyptic kind of world. Now, Robin Hood in and of himself is usually seen as a folk hero, right? He's seen as somebody who took from the people who were taking, you know, that you had the landowners that were kind of like taking all of the money and keeping it, hoarding it at the top. And Robin Hood was taking that money and handing it back out to people. But what if it was food and in a post-apocalyptic world? And what if the food that was being taken was from somebody who had hoarded it all to themselves? Now, you think of things like the bunkers that a lot of doomsday preppers build, right? And if you ever watched the show Doomsday Preppers, I think it was on like probably the History Channel or something like that back in the day. That was a really interesting take on people that were like stocking up for the apocalypse, building doomsday bunkers. But for the most part, a lot of those people were just common, average, everyday people. They weren't super wealthy. They were just coming up with an idea and a plan and kind of giving themselves some options in the event something catastrophic did happen. And that could be helpful in a natural disaster. It could be helpful in the fall of society. Like there's a bunch of different ways that having a bug out bag and a shelter and that kind of stuff could all be helpful to you. But the people I think that Nico is specifically referring to would be the people that are building like the ultra luxurious doomsday bunkers where it's like they have a space to go underground. They're super wealthy. They're building a place that's got its own basically climate, its own electricity grid. Like they have the money and the resources to do that now, so they're kind of building it out for themselves. And yes, it is immoral to hoard resources in that kind of a way. It doesn't matter if you're looking at it from deontology or utilitarianism. It's just to hoard all of the resources like that. That is just straight up immoral. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. There's no way around that. But with then taking that stuff, if that stuff was taken by legal means, you know, there was nothing legally stopping them. Even if it's immoral, would it be moral to then take the stuff from them? I would argue that it would be very much like stealing bread in the event that you're trying to feed a community. If you have an instance where you are trying to steal, you know, you have a bunch of starving people and you have a elite class up here that's hoarding all of the bread, stealing some of that bread, giving it to the people, they're getting fed. That is an overall good for the benefit of society. But that's from a utilitarian perspective. Utilitarianism is the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. We're looking at the group. We're trying to help everybody out, whatever benefits the most people. And so from that aspect, if somebody was hoarding all of if somebody had 10 years worth of food for themselves, and they weren't helping anybody else, it was just themselves, then it wouldn't be immoral under utilitarianism to take some of that food. Now, how that's done could make it a little bit more difficult, morally speaking. It could feel good, depending on the circumstances, to take out the person that was hoarding everything. You know, that is where we get the idea of schadenfreude from, that kind of thing. So there would be that feeling there, but that wouldn't necessarily make it any more right or wrong. But taking that stuff would then technically be, under utilitarianism, the right thing to do, because you're feeding the people that need it. So you're helping the overall greater, you're doing a not so great thing to help a lot of people, which technically is a great thing overall. It's a net positive, right? However, from deontology, no. There is no moral framework. There is no moral. You cannot take anything. Stealing is just across the board wrong by deontology standards. So if you ascribe to deontology, if you say that there are moral right and wrongs and we have to follow those because of either they were handed down by somebody, or that's just the way that it is, we just have these things we have to follow. You can't steal anything at all. It doesn't matter how rich the person was or how greedy they were or what they got stocked up. You cannot take anything at all. So that's where those two come in. But then it gets a little more complicated if you start to question, okay, well, what if the person had hoarded all of this stuff and now they're helping their it was to protect their family. Maybe they have a spouse. Maybe they have some kids. Maybe they have some friends or close relatives. Even if they have servants, let's say they're super wealthy and they've got servants that are now living with them in their bunker. Well, now it's a different perspective, because now it is, well, yeah, they were technically immoral for hoarding all of this stuff that would have helped out a lot of people, and we're all starving. But if we take it from them, now they're going to be starving. You're not talking about one person anymore. You're talking about a group. It's the same thing of, think of a city like Alexandria from the show, where you have this place that had been being built. It wasn't completed yet. It was a subdivision, but early on, some people had gotten into it and kind of like gathered a whole bunch of supplies up, and they had plenty to feed themselves and take care of themselves for a long period of time. By the time the group in the show gets to Alexandria, they've been surviving for years in this little group. They've built up walls. They've lost people over time, but they've built up walls. They have supplies. They send out scouts to get some supplies on occasion, but they've got a lot of stuff stocked up. Would it be wrong to take from a group like that, who had built themselves up in a post-apocalyptic world? Where's that line? And on the one hand, you could say, well, it's you've got the old idea of survival of the fittest, which is social Darwinism, in other words, where you say, well, if we're strong enough and we're capable enough to take all of your stuff, then we deserve it. That only works when you're on top, though. If you're not on top, if you're in a bad place and you need the help, all of a sudden somebody's coming in and taking stuff from you, well, you aren't going to see it quite the same way. All of a sudden, you're going to want to say, you're not just going to lay down and say, oh, well, I guess I wasn't the fittest. I'm just going to go ahead and die now. No, you're going to fight for survival. You're going to say, no, you can't just take this because you're stronger than me. That doesn't make any sense. And you have to always look at it from that perspective, because it's easy to say, we're on top, we're the strong ones, therefore we can take what we want. Anybody can do that. But when the shoe's on the other foot, it's a different story. And so you have to think about it from that perspective. So just because we are big enough and strong enough to go in and take this food from this group that has hoarded it, that has a lot of it, doesn't mean that we should do that. Because we have to think about the future for ourselves too. And if we're ever in that situation, what do we want to have happen? Now, in the best case scenario, maybe you set up a trade. Maybe you find out something that group needs that you can supply, and you can set up some kind of a trade. A lot of groups are going to be wary in that situation. They're going to say, well, we don't really want to let people in necessarily because we don't know what we're going to get. We talked about that in a previous episode. But maybe you could talk about and set up a trade. Hey, we have weapons, we have ammunition, we have able-bodied people, we can bring you stuff. What do you need? We can scavenge stuff for you. And will you be willing to trade if we scavenge certain supplies? And you try to figure out, hey, what do they need and what can we trade for in that situation? And that winds up building long-term relationships. And the more you get to know them, the more they get to know you, the better things are over time. I want to know your guys' thoughts in the comments down below. What do you think would be the right call if you were in a situation in a post-apocalyptic world where you knew somebody had taken stuff, had hoarded stuff prior to, you knew of a location of a doomsday bunker type of situation? What do you think would be right? Would it be right to go in and take it? What if there was just What if it was a group instead of a single person? What if they had a family? What if they had children? How does that change what you think about? I've talked about this before, and I'm going to try to continue to remember to talk about it. But the reason why we bring these things up and talk about them is because it's important to have these thought experiments, to go over these things, to understand the why, not just, hey, this feels like it's right. This is something that I think is probably correct because I feel like it should be correct, but understanding the why and being willing to change your mind if it turns out that the why doesn't make any sense. If your why is for emotional reasons and you realize that could have some flaws in it, finding a better why, or maybe even changing your stance completely, maybe saying that, it would be okay under these circumstances to take from people, but not necessarily from under these other circumstances. Maybe you had thought initially the first instinct is, of course you take from the hoarders. They hoarded all the wealth. Of course I'm going to take from them. But then you think about it a little bit more and you say, well, okay, maybe there would be times that it wouldn't be a good idea to do that. It's important to go through these things, and because it has the way that we go about figuring things out, the methods, the reasons, the base that we build, our fundamental, the foundation of our philosophical, our ethical, our moral background, what we build that on matters. Because it affects us in all walks of life. It affects the way that we handle our day-to-day stuff. It affects the way that we interact with people in the real world. So it's important to pay attention to that stuff and have a good, solid foundation to build that base on, so that we can make sure that we're doing the best we can every day to be a good person, but to help other people out and to make the world a better place overall. So that's all I've got for this one. You can join the Patreon. I've got a Patreon channel, memberships, all that good stuff if you want to help the channel out. Obviously, like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe. All of that stuff goes a long way. Just sitting through all of these videos and commenting on them and that kind of stuff, that helps out a lot. You don't even know how much it helps out. So all of that stuff, I really appreciate all of it. But that's all I've got. I want to thank you all for watching. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one.